Jonathan Schanzer, Vice President of Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and former terrorism analyst at the Treasury Department. So, Jonathan, a lot of time spent during the Sunday shows trying to define ISIS, explain its threat to our country. You say that could be a little bit of a waste of time. Why is that?
Well, it is, because right now what we're hearing is that the alternative to ISIS could be other dangerous regimes in the Middle East like Iran and Syria. These are false distinctions. We need to make sure that we identify enemies across the region. ISIS may be one, but there are many others we need to be concerned about right now.
And that's one of the reasons why Secretary Kerry is in the region talking to not only Iraq's prime minister, but also to our allies as well. Senator Rand Paul had something interesting to say about our partnerships in the region. I want to play this down and get your thoughts.
I personally believe that this group would not be in Iraq and would not be as powerful had we not been supplying their allies in the war, as well as our allies are funding these people. They probably have weapons that were bought either with Saudi money or Kuwaiti money or Qatar money.
The Saudis, Qatar, the Kuwaitis, Jonathan, those are our quote-unquote friends. So if they are actually funding ISIS, then who are our true partners in the region?
Well, look, we don't have good partners. What Senator Paul mentioned here is absolutely correct, that we have seen frenemies of the United States, let's call them, like Saudi, like Qatar, and even Turkey, helping ISIS grow. Turkey, I actually have to say, on their eastern frontier, they've had a very lax border policy allowing for money and arms and training to take place. This has been extremely dangerous, and we have stood by over the last 2 years and really failed to call them out on this and failed to reform them.
And so if our partnerships that we think are established aren't really helping us in our national interest, then how likely is it that we can establish a solid partnership with the government of Iraq?
Well, it's very unlikely, and the reason for that is that the government of Iraq is very much aligned with Iran. And Iran, of course, is a state sponsor of terrorism in its own right, having supported Hamas and Hezbollah and some of those Shiite militias in Iraq that have targeted American soldiers. And so now, you know, it's possible that Iran could have a greater role to play amidst this crisis, and that is, of course, a dangerous development as well.
So James DeRozan is in Iraq right now. He's doing a lot of great reporting, and one of the things that he's talking about is the fact that a lot of the Iraqis are turning to the United States and saying, listen, we really do need your help. Jonathan, what do you think about that? What conditions should we set if we are about to help the Iraqi government as it stands?
Well, look, it's extremely complicated. Obviously, I think the American public isn't interested in putting boots on the ground. That said, obviously, we're also putting in special forces right now, or potentially doing so, advisors on the ground. I think the question is whether there's air support that can be provided. I think we need to tread very, very carefully here, because when we're attacking ISIS, to a certain extent, we're acting as Iran's air force. And this is sort of the challenge that we need to look at right now in a very, very complicated Middle East, one that is far more complicated than it was perhaps even 2 years ago.
And there's all this talk about strategic vision. We heard a little bit from Kevin McCarthy, congressman, on Fox News Sunday about that and whether or not we have a strategic vision for the Middle East. Jonathan, if you were back in that advisory role, whether at the Treasury or otherwise, what would you say is the #1 priority we should have if we're going to map out what our strategy is, not only for tomorrow, but for the next several years down the line in the Middle East?
Well, look, I think first of all we need to identify who our true allies are, and we also need to make sure that we understand who our enemies are, and we can't blur that. And so relying on frenemies like Qatar, like Turkey, like Saudi Arabia, thinking of Iran as a possible partner, these are all massive mistakes. We need to make sure that we combat both Sunni jihadism and Shia Islamism and radicalism at the same time. We've not done a good job of it over these last couple of years, particularly as this Syria civil war has spun out of control.
Not to too much of a pun on the map that we have, but different shades of gray, the same color essentially is what you're saying, Jonathan, when we look at some of our enemies in that area. Great to see you as always. Look forward to having you back. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.